This is Stories Her Heart Holds. And tonight, I'm going to tell you about the man I never stopped loving. It started with dust. Not memories, not tears, dust. My granddaughter Lily was up in the attic with me, pulling down old boxes I hadn't opened since before her mother was born. She was humming, that soft little tune she always makes up when she's focused. The light was warm and golden, pouring in through the tiny round window. Dust floated like snowflakes in that beam. I remember thinking, it looks like time is still dancing, even up here. "Grandma, what's this?" she asked. She held up a small wooden box. It had a brass clasp, tarnished and worn, with a carved letter T in the corner. My heart stopped. I knew that box. I hadn't seen it in 50 years. "Let me see that, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The wood felt smooth and familiar in my hands. I could still smell the faint scent of cedar and something else. Old letters. Inside, neatly tied with a faded blue ribbon, were a handful of envelopes. My handwriting. No, his. Thomas Reed. Lily leaned closer. "Who's Thomas?" I smiled, though my chest felt heavy. He was a boy I used to know, but that wasn't true. Thomas wasn't just a boy I used to know. He was the first boy who ever looked at me like I mattered. I sat down on an old trunk and held the box in my lap. The paper had yellowed with age, but I could still make out his handwriting, careful, slanted, with a little curl at the end of every Y. "Can I read one?" Lily asked. I hesitated. I hadn't even read them since the week before my wedding. "Maybe later," I told her. "Let me tell you about him first." So I did. Right there in the attic, surrounded by old Christmas decorations and forgotten photo albums, I started telling my granddaughter about the summer of 1968, the summer I met Thomas Reed. I was 19. My hair was longer, blonder back then, and I thought I knew everything. My parents owned a small diner by the shore, and I worked there every summer. Thomas came in one afternoon, carrying a paint-splattered notebook and a camera slung over his shoulder. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and asked if he could sketch the view from our window. I said yes, even though that seat was usually for locals only. He smiled at me, the kind of smile that didn't just touch his lips, but his eyes too. "Thanks," he said. "You've got the best view in town." I thought he meant the ocean. But he didn't. Over the next few weeks, he came in almost every day. Sometimes he'd talk about the colors of the sky. Other times, he'd just sit and draw while I refilled his coffee. He was quiet, but in a way that made you want to listen. By July, he wasn't just drawing the sea anymore. He was drawing me. I found one of his sketches tucked under my tip jar once, a pencil drawing of me leaning on the counter, looking out at the water. At the bottom, he'd written, "You belong to the ocean." One night, after closing, he asked if I wanted to walk with him along the beach. The tide was low and the sand was cool under our feet. The moonlight made everything glow. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. He took my hand and that was it. That was the start. I remember thinking, this must be what it feels like when life chooses you. He told me he was leaving in September. Vietnam. I tried not to cry, but I did. He promised to write. He said he'd come back and we'd travel somewhere warm. Maybe California, maybe Greece. He said he wanted to paint sunsets for the rest of his life, and he wanted me beside him. We kissed that night, soft, slow, like a secret promise. And then September came. He left. For months I waited by the mailbox. Every letter from him was folded neatly, edges sharp. He told me about the heat, the noise, the loneliness. He signed every one. "Yours always, Thomas." Then one day, the letters stopped. I didn't get a call. I didn't get a telegram. Just silence. My mother told me to let it go. My father said I should focus on something real. A year later, I met Richard. He was kind, steady, and dependable, a good man. But he wasn't Thomas. I married Richard in the spring of 1971. We built a life together, raised 2 children, paid bills, hosted Sunday dinners. And I did love him, in a safe, quiet way. But some nights, when the waves were loud and the wind howled off the coast, I'd think about Thomas and wonder where he was, whether he ever thought of me. Lily touched my hand, her eyes soft and curious. "Did he ever come back?" she asked. I smiled sadly. I never knew. But that wasn't quite true either, because one winter morning, about a year after Richard passed, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name, written in familiar slanted handwriting. Careful, with a little curl at the end of every Y. I stopped there in the attic. Because even after all these years, my hands still shake when I think about opening that envelope. Lily was watching me, waiting. This is Stories. Her heart holds. Yesterday, I left you with a box in the attic, letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, a name I hadn't spoken in decades. Thomas Reed. Today, I'll tell you what happened when I finally opened that letter. It was late afternoon. The sun hung low over the water, making the ocean sparkle like scattered diamonds. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing quietly, pretending she wasn't waiting for me. I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window where I could see the waves curl against the rocks. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. Inside was a single envelope, cream-colored, edges frayed from time. My name was written in familiar handwriting, the letters looping just the way Thomas always did. I almost didn't have the courage to open it, but curiosity won. I unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was exactly as I remembered. Neat, precise, like each word had been measured against his heart before he wrote it. "Eleanor," it began, "if you are reading this, then perhaps fate has allowed me to reach you after all these years. I don't know where to begin, but I must start somewhere, so I will begin with the truth. I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped wondering if you were safe, if life treated you kindly, if someone else had captured your heart. I have lived with your memory for 50 years, and I hope this letter finds you with the kindness and patience I have always admired in you." I felt my chest tighten. My breath caught. Lily leaned forward, eyes wide. I whispered, He's been thinking about me all this time," I read on. Thomas wrote about the war, the things I had never fully understood. He told me about the days he spent overseas, watching friends fall and trying to make sense of a world that had grown cruel overnight. He told me how he wanted to come back to me, how he wanted to return to the small coastal town where we met, but he couldn't. I came back changed, Eleanor. Not the man you knew, not the boy who held your hand on the beach. I feared you would not recognize me, or worse, that your heart had moved on. I could feel the weight of his words. The fear, the longing, the regret. It all poured out of the page like a tide I had never let myself see. He mentioned my marriage. Not in bitterness, not in anger, just in gentle acknowledgement. "I know life gave you Richard, a man who provided a steady hand when I could not. I hope you loved him in your own way, and I hope he made you happy." I only wish I could have been that man too. I blinked back tears. 50 years. 50 years of waiting, wondering, missing. And yet here he was, reaching across time with words that made my heart ache and flutter at the same time. Then, the part that made my hands shake. "I've returned, Eleanor. Not because I expect anything, not because I think I can take what life gave me so long ago, but because I wanted to see you again, if you will allow it. I live only a few towns over now, and if you are willing, I would like nothing more than to sit with you on the beach where we first met and remember what we had. Even if only for a brief moment." I could barely hold the paper. I sank into the chair, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. Lily came over and wrapped her arms around me. "Grandma?" she asked softly. Is it him?" I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart." It's him. All this time. It was always him. I didn't know what to feel. Joy, fear, regret, hope, they all swirled together. My body remembered him as he had been, tall, lean, with a quiet strength. But my mind could only imagine the man he had become after all those years. Would he still recognize me? Would he forgive me for marrying another man? Would he even want to see me at all? I didn't know the answers. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, I sat on my porch with the letter in my hands. The sky had turned a deep orange, the waves reflecting fire. I read the letter again, slowly, savoring every word, every syllable, every moment of connection that time had not stolen from us. I could almost hear his voice, soft and earnest, reading the words aloud, and my heart ached for the years lost and ached for the chance to see him again. I decided I would go. I would meet Thomas. Not to rekindle what had been, not to erase the past, not to steal back lost time, but to see him, to speak to him, to understand the man he had become, and to finally share the story of my life with the man I had never stopped loving. The next morning, I called him. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the phone. He answered on the first ring, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. Eleanor? His voice. Just like I remembered, warm and steady. A little older, a little deeper, but unmistakable. Thomas, I whispered. He laughed softly. I was hoping you'd still be here. And just like that, it felt as though 50 years melted away. I told him I would come see him the following weekend. My heart raced with a mixture of joy and nerves I hadn't felt in decades. I wondered what we would say, what we would feel. I thought about Richard, about the life we shared, about the children I raised. I thought about how it was possible to love two men in two very different ways, and how time had a strange way of weaving its patterns, twisting hearts into shapes we never expected. When Lily found me later, I was smiling. Tears streaked on my cheeks, the letter held close to my chest. "Grandma?" she asked, curious. "I'm going to see him, sweetheart," I said. "The boy I loved. After all these years, I'm going to see him again." And Lily, wise beyond her 10 years, simply nodded. She understood in a way only a grandchild can. This is Stories Her Heart Holds. Yesterday, I read Thomas's letter. Today, I'm going to tell you how I prepared to see him for the first time in 50 years. It wasn't easy. Not for my heart. Not for my memories. The morning sun crept through the curtains, casting long stripes across my bedroom floor. I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter in my hands, tracing Thomas's words with trembling fingers. I had spent my life following a steady, quiet path, one marked by Richard's steady hand, children, grandchildren, dinners, birthdays, and simple routines. But now, 50 years later, a single letter threatened to uproot everything I thought I knew about myself. I felt guilty. Not for loving Thomas, never for that. But for the life I built with Richard, for the years I had promised him devotion, and for the children we raised together. Richard was gone. Yes, but his memory was alive in every corner of this house. In the smell of the kitchen, in the garden where he planted the roses, in the creak of the front steps that had known every morning we shared. And yet, Thomas was still alive. He had returned. He wanted to see me. And somehow my heart had known all these years that this moment could come. I called Lily into my room. "Sweetheart," I said, "I'm going to meet someone important." Her eyes lit up, a mix of curiosity and understanding. "Grandpa?" she asked innocently. "No," I smiled. "Not Grandpa. Someone else." I wanted to explain, but words failed me. How do you tell a child that love can stretch over decades, that hearts can hold multiple truths at once? So I simply said, You'll understand one day. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation, not just the practical kind, but the emotional kind. I combed through old photographs, brushing dust off the memories. Richard in his fishing hat, smiling in the sun. Lily as a baby, eyes wide and curious. Me, standing in the doorway of the diner, waiting for Thomas to come in. Each photo reminded me of the life I had lived, the choice I had made, the love I had buried, not out of forgetfulness, but because life demanded survival, practicality, and sometimes quiet compromise. I went shopping for clothes I hadn't worn in years. Something simple, not flashy, but something that might honor both the years and the woman I had become. I found a soft linen dress, pale blue like the color of the sky on a summer morning. Thomas had always liked blue. I remembered the way his eyes had caught that color in my dress the day we first walked along the beach. I stared at my reflection. Lines had etched themselves around my eyes, my hair had silvered, and my hands bore the map of decades lived. And yet, I hoped, foolishly maybe, that he would still see me, that somehow he would recognize the girl he had loved, even inside this older, wiser woman I had become. The night before I was to see him, I could barely sleep. My thoughts were a storm. Fear, excitement, guilt, hope. I wondered how he had changed, whether he had married, whether he carried the same memories I did. And then, almost immediately, I felt the warmth of our past, that first summer, our hands brushing, our laughter mingling with the sound of the surf. I realized that even though life had taken us down separate paths, Thomas had remained a part of me. A quiet, indelible part. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that had always been enough to bridge the gap between past and present. The morning came, crisp and clear. I packed the letter carefully into my bag. It felt like a talisman, a bridge across the decades. I left the house early, driving along the coastal roads, the ocean shimmering on my left, the gulls crying overhead. Every turn reminded me of our youth. Every curve of the shoreline whispered his name. I imagined the moment I would see him. Would he recognize me immediately? Would there be hesitation? Would the years of silence melt in a single glance? I arrived at the small cafe where we had agreed to meet. It was a quiet place, nestled near the edge of a cliff, overlooking the ocean. Nothing had changed. The same wooden tables, the same brass lamp on the counter, the same scent of coffee and salt air. I felt as though time had paused, waiting for us. And then I saw him. Thomas was sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, eyes scanning the waves. Older, yes, with silver in his hair and lines around his eyes, but unmistakably him. My heart leapt, my breath caught. For a moment, I couldn't move. He looked up, and our eyes met. And just like that, 50 years collapsed. He smiled softly. "Eleanor," he said. His voice carried the weight of decades, of longing, of all the words we never said. "Thomas," I whispered. And then the years poured out. Laughter, tears, memories, regrets, hopes. Words spilled between us like waves crashing on the shore. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. We simply sat together, letting the silence speak for the years lost, letting the wind and the waves tell us that some love, no matter the years or distance, never truly dies. Lily's words echoed in my mind. She understood. And now, I understood too. Love doesn't always follow the straight path we imagine. Sometimes it wanders, it waits, it survives quietly in letters, in memories, in hearts willing to endure the passage of time. And now, Thomas was here. And for the first time in 50 years, I felt whole. This is Stories Her Heart Holds. Yesterday, I told you about seeing Thomas after 50 years. Today, I'll tell you what it felt like to sit with him and let the memories and the words we never said come rushing back. We sat at the small cafe, the ocean glittering behind him like a million tiny memories. Thomas had changed, yes. His hair was silver, his shoulders a little stooped, but the warmth in his eyes, that hadn't changed a bit. We started talking about simple things first. The weather, the waves, the way the sea smelled after a storm. But soon, like the tide, deeper memories began to pull us in. "You still live here," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "I do," I replied. "And you?" I stayed close. Not here exactly, but just a few towns down the coast. I couldn't stay away, not completely. I had to see the ocean, had to feel the same wind on my face. It reminded me of you. His words made my chest ache. 50 years of silence, 50 years of wondering, and here he was, telling me he had never left, in heart, if not in body. We began to reminisce about that first summer. I told him how I remembered every day we spent together, how he had drawn me at the diner, how we walked barefoot along the beach, how his hand had felt so steady in mine. He laughed softly. "I was so afraid you'd forget me," he admitted. "I thought if I didn't write, if I didn't send letters, maybe you'd move on and forget the boy you loved so briefly. But I couldn't. I never could." I smiled through tears. "I never forgot, Thomas. Not for a single day." And then the difficult questions came. "Why did you marry Richard?" he asked gently, not accusingly. I took a deep breath. "Life, Thomas. Life happened. You left, and I waited. And waiting became a kind of survival. Richard. He was kind, reliable. He made me a home, and I loved him in my own way. But my heart, it stayed with you." He nodded. I could see the understanding in his eyes. He had carried his own regrets, I realized, but there was no bitterness. Only the quiet acceptance of time's unyielding passage. We spoke of the letters, too, of the ones I never answered. I told him I had kept them hidden, fearing I might be selfish, fearing I might upset the delicate balance of my life. Thomas reached across the table and took my hand. "I never blamed you, Eleanor. I know why you didn't answer. I know why you did what you thought was best. Life is complicated, and love, well, love is never simple. We survived it. That's what matters." His words made me cry silently. I had carried so much guilt for loving him and for moving on. And yet, sitting there, holding his hand after 50 years, I realized that love is not measured by possession, but by memory, endurance, and connection. We walked along the beach afterward, letting our fingers brush occasionally, silently sharing the decades of longing we had endured separately. The tide lapped at our feet, erasing footprints in the sand, reminding us that life moves forward, even if memories linger. We spoke of the things we had never dared to share with anyone else, our fears, our hopes, the loneliness that had haunted us. We laughed at our youthful naivety, and we cried for the years we had lost. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked finally, looking out at the horizon. "Marrying Richard, moving on, all those years apart?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I regret nothing. Every choice led me here, to you, and you. You lived a life full of love. That's all I could ever want for you. I just wish I had been there sooner." I smiled, letting the tears fall freely now. I wish the same. But maybe it's enough that we're here now. That afternoon, we sat on the rocks at the edge of the shore, watching the sun dip into the ocean. For a moment, words were unnecessary. Time had slowed, and the world had reduced to just us and the endless sea. I thought of Richard, and I whispered a quiet thanks. Not for the love I wished had been mine, but for the life that allowed me to endure, to love, to wait, and finally to reunite with the boy who had captured my heart so long ago. Lily had asked me the night before if love could survive time. Now I knew the answer. Love doesn't always need presence. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it survives quietly, tucked in letters, hidden in memories, whispered along the wind. And sometimes it returns. As we walked back to the car, Thomas reached for my hand again. "We have time now," he said. "Not forever, maybe, but enough." And I knew he was right. 50 years had passed, and yet, sitting there hand in hand with him, I felt like the same girl on that summer evening at the diner, looking at him with wonder and hope. This is Stories Her Heart Holds. Yesterday, I told you about walking along the beach with Thomas, hand in hand, feeling the decades between us collapse. Today, I'll share what it was like to revisit the past. Not just the good memories, but the hard truths we had both carried for so long. We returned to my house that evening. I wanted him to see the life I had lived, the life I had chosen. Richard's memory lingered in every corner, but I needed Thomas to understand that my love for him had never faded, even as I built a family and a home with another man. I led him through the rooms, the kitchen where Richard had cooked Sunday dinners, the living room lined with family photographs, and finally, the attic, that dusty, quiet sanctuary where memories slept beneath layers of old boxes and forgotten treasures. Thomas looked around, eyes wide with gentle wonder. "You kept all of this," he said softly, touching the spines of old photo albums. "Yes," I replied. "I didn't throw anything away. I couldn't. Not the memories." We sat together on the attic floor, sifting through photographs and letters. Each one sparked a memory, and with each memory came a wave of emotion. Laughter, regret, longing. "This one," I said, holding up a photograph of the diner, "is where we met." Thomas leaned closer. "I remember that day. You were wearing a blue dress. I told you that color belonged to the ocean," I smiled. "You still remember that?" "Of course," he said, his eyes glistening. "Some things never leave you." We found the old letters we had written each other. I hadn't read them in decades, and now, seeing them again, I realized how carefully we had both tried to preserve our love in words. Each letter was a testament to a devotion that had survived absence, silence, and time. I read one aloud. "I think of you every day, Eleanor. I wonder if you're happy, if life has treated you kindly, if someone else has taken my place in your heart. I only hope that wherever you are, you know that I am yours in memory always." Thomas smiled wistfully. "I never stopped thinking about you either. Not for one single day." Then came the harder memories, the ones we had avoided. "Tell me about Richard," Thomas said softly. "Was he good to you?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, Thomas. He was a good man. Steady, kind, reliable. He gave me a life, children, stability, and I loved him, in the way you love someone for what they give you, not for what your heart longs for." He nodded, understanding more than I could have hoped. "And your children?" "They know me," I said. "They don't know Thomas. Not yet. But they know I loved, truly, deeply, even if quietly. That's enough for them, I think." We spent the night talking, and the hours passed unnoticed. We shared stories of our youth, our dreams, our fears, our first kisses on the shore. And we spoke of the years apart, each revelation like a bridge connecting the lives we had lived separately. There was laughter, too. We laughed at how young and naive we had been, at the mistakes we had made, at the letters that had gone unanswered. And in the laughter, I felt a freedom I hadn't known since my teenage years, a sense that the heart, even after decades, could still be brave. Eventually, silence fell between us. But it was a comfortable silence, filled with understanding and unspoken words. We watched the moon rise over the ocean, casting silver light across the waves. "I wish things could have been different," I said finally. Thomas reached for my hand. "I do too," he admitted. "But life gave us what it could. And now we have this, time together, however brief it may be. I'll take it." I realized something profound that night. Love is not always about possession or timing or who arrives first. Sometimes love is simply enduring, waiting quietly in the background, ready to be recognized again when the world allows. And in that quiet attic, surrounded by memories, letters, and photographs, I knew that what Thomas and I had shared could never truly be lost. We made plans for the next few days, to walk along the beaches we had loved as young adults, to revisit places that had shaped us, and to share stories of the life we had lived without each other. Each step, each memory was a chance to reconnect, to understand, and to forgive both ourselves and the choices we had made. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the extraordinary nature of life, how love can survive decades of absence, how it can endure even when buried beneath the demands of reality, and how sometimes the heart has a patience that the mind cannot comprehend. I drifted to sleep with the sound of the ocean in my ears, feeling a quiet joy I hadn't known for 50 years. This is Stories Her Heart Holds. Yesterday, I told you about revisiting the past with Thomas, uncovering memories and shared regrets. Today, I'll tell you how we began to reconcile, how two lives, separated by decades, found their way back together. The morning was clear, the kind of crisp coastal air that makes your lungs feel like they're filling with sunlight. Thomas and I decided to walk along the beach where it all began, the place where our young hearts had first collided, where we had promised forever without knowing what the world would demand of us. We walked slowly, side by side, letting our fingers occasionally brush. No words were necessary at first. The sound of the waves and the sand beneath our feet carried our emotions better than any language could. "Do you ever regret letting me go?" he asked quietly, finally breaking the comfortable silence. I thought about Richard, about my children, about the life I had built. "No," I admitted. "I don't regret you. I regret that we couldn't have had more time together when we were young. But I don't regret the life I built either. Everything led me here to you, even if it took 50 years. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I feel the same. I regret nothing. Life gave me experiences, even if they weren't the ones I dreamed of. And now we have this chance, however brief it may be, to be together in a way that matters." We sat on a weathered log near the water, watching the sun rise higher, casting golden light across the waves. I told him about Richard, about our marriage, our home, the children we raised. I spoke honestly, without excuses, acknowledging the love and comfort Richard had provided while my heart quietly waited for him. Thomas listened, never judging, only holding my hand with quiet tenderness. "I understand," he said simply. "Life isn't about what we want. It's about what we do with what we're given. And you made the most of it." The conversation turned to our youth, the letters we had written, the dreams we had shared, the summers that seemed to belong to another lifetime. We laughed softly at our naivety, cried for the moments lost, and marveled at how strong our connection had remained, despite everything. I realized then that love isn't always measured by presence. It can survive absence, endure silence, and bloom decades later when hearts are ready to recognize it again. Later, we walked through the small town, revisiting familiar places. The diner where we met, the old pier, the lighthouse that had been a secret meeting place. Everywhere we went, memories flooded back. The smell of salt in the air, the laughter of teenagers from long ago, the gentle sway of boats in the harbor. With each step, the tension of decades apart softened. We shared stories we had never told anyone else, fears, mistakes, and even moments of joy we thought had been forgotten. And with each story, our bond grew stronger, deeper, more real. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, we sat on the porch of a small coastal cottage I had rented for the weekend. We held hands, watching the waves roll in, letting the silence speak for the years we had lost. "I don't know what the future holds," I said softly, "but I do know this. I'm grateful for today, for you." "For us," Thomas smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Me too, Eleanor. Whatever happens next, I'll cherish this, us, for the rest of my life." We didn't need grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Reconciliation, I realized, wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about acknowledging it, embracing it, and choosing to move forward together, however late that choice came. For the first time in decades, I felt whole. Not just because I was reunited with Thomas, but because I had embraced the truth of my life, the love I carried, the life I had built, and the possibilities still before me. As night fell, we sat together on the porch, listening to the ocean, feeling the wind carry away the last remnants of regret. Our hearts, once divided by time and circumstance, had found their way back to one another. And for the first time in 50 years, I felt complete. This is Stories Her Heart Holds. Yesterday, I told you about the reconciliation with Thomas. Today, I'll share how we embraced the life we had, the love we'd carried, and finally, the peace that comes with following your heart, even if it takes 50 years. The morning after our walk through town, I woke to the smell of salt and coffee drifting through the open windows. Thomas was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table of the coastal cottage, reading the letters we had rediscovered in the attic. "Good morning," I said softly. "Good morning," he replied, looking up with that familiar, gentle smile that made my heart flutter, just as it had all those years ago. We spent the day talking, walking along the beach and revisiting the places that had shaped us as young adults. Each location sparked memories, some bittersweet, some joyful. But through it all, I realized that the passage of time had not diminished our love. It had simply prepared us to recognize it in its purest form. At one point, we sat on the old pier, watching a small boat drift along the horizon. Thomas took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Eleanor," he said, "I've carried the memory of you for 50 years. I've imagined what it would be like to see you again, to hear your voice, to feel your hand in mine. And now, here you are." Tears filled my eyes. "Thomas, I've carried you too. Even while I lived my life, even while I loved Richard and raised my children, my heart never stopped knowing you." We sat in silence for a long moment, letting the wind and waves speak for the words we could not say. Later that evening, after returning to the cottage, we shared a quiet dinner. Candlelight flickered across the room, casting soft shadows on the walls. We laughed, reminisced, and told each other stories we had never dared to share. The fears, the dreams, the small regrets and quiet triumphs of a life lived fully but always with the memory of one another in the background. It wasn't just about rekindling a first love. It was about finally embracing the truth of our hearts and the lives we had lived separately and together. I thought about Richard that night. I whispered a quiet thanks for the love and stability he had given me. Without him, I might never have had the strength, patience, and understanding to recognize and accept this love now. I realize that love is not a finite thing. It grows, transforms, and sometimes waits, quietly, patiently, until hearts are ready. Thomas squeezed my hand. "You're crying," he said, smiling softly. "I am," I admitted. "But these are happy tears. 50 years apart, and yet, here we are." We spent the next few days walking the beaches, revisiting old haunts, and simply being together. There was no rush, no grand plans, only the quiet joy of rediscovered companionship. One afternoon, as we sat on a weathered bench overlooking the ocean, I turned to him. "Thomas, I don't know how many years we have left, but I know this. Being with you now, understanding that love can endure time and distance, is enough. It's more than enough." He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I know, Eleanor. I've waited a lifetime for this, and even if tomorrow we must part again, I will always carry you with me." That evening, we watched the sunset together. The sky a brilliant canvas of oranges, pinks, and purples. I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. The past, with all its mistakes and regrets, was behind us. The present was ours to cherish. And for the first time in 50 years, my heart felt fully at home. When I returned home, Lily ran to greet me. She could see the change in my eyes, the quiet joy, the weight lifted. "Grandma," she said, hugging me tightly, "are you happy?" I smiled, holding her close. "Yes, sweetheart. Very happy. Sometimes love waits a long time, but when it returns, it's more beautiful than we ever imagined." That night, as I wrote the final notes to myself about our journey, I realized something profound. Life does not always follow the path we expect. Love does not always arrive on time. But when the heart is patient, when it endures, it finds its way back to where it belongs. Thomas and I had found our way home, not just to each other, but to the truth we had carried all these years. And in that, I discovered a peace and joy that no passage of time could ever take away.